This is Guerrilla Insights, episode 1. This is via the Guerrilla Economist. It's a new thing that I'm launching. And what it is basically I'm breaking down a lot of the news, some of the things that I think is important to highlight. So this is my own thing. I'm flying solo on this. I don't have El Cuco with me working the airwaves, making sure that this broadcast is coming out crispy and clean. So I don't know if this broadcast will be coming out crispy and clean. That's going to be up to you, the listener. But people have been clamoring for it. People have been emailing me and saying, "Hey, why don't you, come back? Why don't you just start doing some of your own stuff by yourself?" Some people have also been saying, "Hey, why are you sounding all different?" Well, I sound different because my throat is not the best it used to be, especially with this weather. So excuse the dark, foreboding way that I'm speaking right now. I'm not trying to do it for any kind of dramatic effect. It's just that my throat is closing in a little bit. One of the things I wanted to highlight jumping into this, and if you hear some background noise, please forgive me. That's like people running around outside in the snowy day that is here in New York. One of the things I wanted to highlight real quick, folks, is some of the things that's making the rounds in the mainstream media as well as the alt media, and I think there's a lot of people that misunderstand what's going on. That thing that I'm talking about, that event that I'm talking about, is Donald Trump pardoning 5 banks. These are 5 mega banks. And one of the things that, people are reacting to, they're saying, see, he's a sellout. See, he's part of the globalists. See, he's with the banksters. See, he's with Wall Street. See, he's in the pocket of Wall Street. See, he's sold us down the river. Right? That would be the automatic response. And I understand that. And it would seem that way. And I'm gonna break down one article real quick. This was from our cohorts at Zero Hedge, which was got this from the Free Thought Project, and it's a legitimate. I'm not picking on them. This is just a random article that I'm picking on, that I'm taking up here. All the articles that are reporting this event are reporting it the same way, and it reads the same. So I'm not nitpicking here. Please don't misconstrue that. I'm not trying to target anybody here whatsoever. I'm just talking about the information and the information that's out there, and that's it. That's it. Simply it, and nothing less, nothing more. Okay. One of the things that I was saying is that he pardoned 5 mega banks, which is especially notable because of the amount of money he owes them. Okay, let's focus on that for a little second here. He says Trump has, let me just expand this. Trump has been using Deutsche Bank, and if you've been following me for quite some time, and you've been following especially Hump Day, last year it was pretty much tradition that Bix and I would have a story or two to bash Deutsche Bank, because every Wednesday something was going on with Deutsche Bank. It was, you can set your watch by it. So Trump's been using Deutsche Bank since the 1990s, and the Financial Times has reported that he now owes Deutsche Bank at least $130 million in outstanding loans secured in properties in Miami, Chicago, and Washington. However, the report claimed that the actual number is likely much larger at 300 million. See, they don't really know. Okay, let's just play devil's advocate. Let's just say it is 300. Let's just say it's 300 million. Okay. Reports claim that Deutsche Bank was the only bank willing to lend Trump money after his companies faced multiple bankruptcies. The relationship has continued over the years, and analysis from Wall Street Journal claimed that Trump has received at least $2.5 billion in loans from Deutsche Bank. Okay. Let's delve into that a little bit. Let's delve into that. Let me see here. Oh, excuse me. There have been concerns that Trump's ties to banks are becoming a conflict of interest dating back to the 2016 election, and the evidence of support for those concerns is now becoming increasingly clear. During the week of the Christmas, the Federal Register announced that Trump administration has issued waivers to Citigroup, JP Morgan, Barclays, UBS, and Deutsche Bank, all mega banks facing charges of fraud and corruption. The The banks were involved in the LIBOR scandal, in which they colluded to deliberately depress the rate at which they paid out investments. And by suppressing the London Interbank Offered Rate, the LIBOR, at the beginning of an economic crisis in 2007, the mega banks were able to boost their earnings to give customers a false sense of security. Deutsche Bank pled guilty to wire fraud in a U.S. court in 2015 and went on to pay $3.5 billion for its role in the LIBOR scandal. You all remember that. I wrote extensively about LIBOR. I told you the 800 trillion in loans that were out there that were affected because of LIBOR, the loans, the investments. I mean, all sorts of financial monies were was affected because of LIBOR. I talked about Barclays, who got bloodied because of LIBOR. Then before it reached the 7.2 billion settlement with the Justice Department in early 2017, this is Deutsche Bank again, jumping back into it. In June of 2017, Deutsche Bank trader David Liu, who was based in Singapore, pleaded guilty to conspiring to spoof gold and silver, platinum, and palladium futures in a federal court in Chicago, confirming that the biggest banks in the world have conspired to rig precious metals prices. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Trump granted the 5-year exemptions to these banks and 3-year exemptions to UBS, Deutsche Bank. And it should be noted that his administration is not the only one that have done this. In 2016, the Obama administration extended temporary 1-year waivers to the 5 banks, and just as happened to be the same ones that Trump has now extended the exemption on, revealing the real rulers in D.C. And this is pretty much the narrative that's going on right now in mainstream media and as well as alt media. See, Trump's a sellout. Trump's a sellout. Look what he did. He's extended these pardons. He's extended these waivers. And that's somehow some sort of a clear indicator that he's compromised. And it's easy to read that. It's very, very easy to read that. It's very easy to get that as the what's the word I'm looking for? As the thing, so to speak, as the main thing that pops out at you when you first read the article. But you'd be entirely wrong. You'd be entirely wrong. Those waivers from Obama were set to expire this year. If he didn't exempt those waivers, what would happen? Well, naturally, every single one of those banks, okay, every single one of those banks will be going through some major financial repercussions right now as we speak. And what would happen when you have 5 of the biggest banks going through some sort of a financial repercussion? Okay, or going through lawsuits, going through prosecution right now? What would happen to the economic backlash? You are talking about a market crash. You will have, folks, in no uncertain terms, another Hank Paulson-like event where somebody like a Secretary of Treasury, like a Hank Paulson, maybe this time it'll be Steve Mnuchin, running into Congress saying, hey, you know what? We need another bailout. The banks will be dealt with. You see, if Trump were to deal with these banks right now, you're talking about an economic cataclysm. We're not ready to switch over to the new system as of yet. I said this, and I said this once before. The changeover will happen, but we first have to have infrastructure in place. We first need to have a restored physical economy. To pull the plug right now will do more harm than good. The bad guys have to be punished. That's why he gave them 5-year waivers. 5-year waivers. In other words, we know who you are. We have all the records on all the transactions, all the calls, all the emails you've ever done. We have that in our databases from the NSA. We have that data. We just got to go look for it. It's in our possession already. But to go ahead and put these banks in, to tie these banks up, to lynch these banks right now, which is something that we would all want to see because we want to see that justice. We want to see them pay for what they've done. To have them snatched and grabbed and prosecuted right now will do more harm to the economy and detract from a lot of the things that need to happen right now, folks. Let me tell you something. If the economy were to implode right now, you're talking about massive problems. You're talking about rioting. You're talking about starvation. You're talking about death. You're talking about disease. You're talking about the complete breakdown of the just in time delivery network. And that's what we have today. We have the just in time delivery network where you need something, it's there for you just in time. Nobody stocks anything anymore. Now, you might be a prepper. You might be a prepper. You might be somebody who's already set up to weather 10, 15 years of tumult. But 99.99% of your countrymen are not. And you might have pity and contempt on these poor saps. But at the end of the day, they're still your countrymen. You cannot create more chaos than what is needed. There is a time to deal with the banks. Now is not the time because number one, you're taking down the deep state. Number two, you've wrested the control of much of the financial manipulation from out of the deep state's hands. So you know you're going to play the game. You know you're going to have to manipulate at some level to keep the house of cards from falling because there's still some house cleaning to be done. There's still some deep state members that need to be caught. There's still some politicians. There's still some Rockefellers. There's still some Rothschilds that need to be dealt with. There's still some actions that need to be done. You cannot do those certain actions if you're caught up in the whirlwind that is the financial crisis again. And you don't need that on your presidential term when everybody in the entire world is gunning for you. Every elitist in the entire world is gunning for you. This is the last thing you need. You don't need to give any more ammo, not the slightest inch of ground, not the slightest room of quarter whatsoever to the enemies that are on the far left and on the neocon right. You don't need that. You don't need any fingers pointing. You want this to be the smoothest takedown possible. You want to do this as effectively as possible. So let us deal with the banks when the time is right. But as of now, let the phony baloney continue for a little while longer. Let it continue for a little while longer because you cannot deal with it right now. Now, people say, well, he's doing this because he owes $140 million to the banks. He doesn't owe the banks anything. His companies. This is all his companies have faced bankruptcy before. He had four companies that went into bankruptcy, and he did that for tax purposes because the payout. It's better to scuttle them and get the tax benefits than it is to continue to pay for a failing business. That is a smart business move. Four companies, four bankruptcies. How many companies does the man run? His organization runs 514 or 515 companies. So 4 bankruptcies out of 515, I don't call that failure, I call that success. Now, if you have those 4 bankruptcies and then all you're saying is, oh, he owns $140 million, and let's just play devil's advocate, and let's just say he owes $300 million to Deutsche Bank. Let's just say that. $300 million to Deutsche Bank. Well, Deutsche Bank's loaned him throughout the years $2.5 billion for properties in New York, in Miami, in Chicago, in LA. $2.5 billion. So out of the $2.5 billion loan, in which he's acquired buildings and assets that are worth far more than that. I'll tell you right now, being in New York, you could walk into a Trump building. One Trump building that he owns would be worth over $4 or $5 or $6 billion. So in a $2.5 billion loan, and he only owes, and let's just say the conservative amount, let's just play devil's advocate. He only owes $300 million. My friend, that is just 0.01%. That's nothing. That's less than 1%. Do you worry about the 1% you owe to your credit card company? If you had a credit line of $100 and you owe $1, are you losing sleep over it? Are you losing sleep over it? If you owe $100 to American Express, Discover, Visa, MasterCard, you have $100 credit line and you owe them $1. Are you losing sleep over it? No. But do you see how this spins? I want you to understand the psychology of this stories like this. Do you see how you can get caught up in basically what is it? It's a non-issue. This piece of news is as significant as saying, "Oh, the Secret Service is spending too much money trying to protect his family." Remember that was a news headline, right? That was a news headline. It's a non-issue. This is a non-issue. He's not in his companies anymore. His sons run his company. Okay, he's handed that over. So he personally doesn't owe them anyway. I own businesses, I own companies, I own, several. So if one of my companies owes a 1%, less than 1% of a loan or a line of credit we've gotten from a lender, I'm not losing sleep over it. And whatever happens to that line or lien is the responsible. They're gonna If something happens, they're gonna have to sue that LLC. They're not coming after me personally. They're gonna have to sue that LLC. That's the situation that's being played out here, folks. That's what you have to understand. You read a psychological story like this, you're going to immediately implant yourself with thoughts that he's a bankster. Look, he's bailing out the bank. He's not bailing out the banks. The banks are already zombie dead institutions. They're already dead. They are already failed. They are walking. These are zombie institutions. They're done for. Okay? They're done for. They will get dealt with. But right now, creating a financial crisis, and someone will say, "Well, why is Deutsche Bank adding it?" Well, you have to include Deutsche Bank into this whole entire thing with the other five. You have to. Why? Because Deutsche Bank is what does the dirty work for J.P. Morgan. They're the ones who clears. They're the ones who had the seat on the London, the LBMA, the London Metal, the London Bullion Market Association. They're the ones who had that seat there. They're the ones who were working with J.P. Morgan to get a lot of the shenanigans done. You think the largest scandal in financial history, which will be dealt with, folks, believe you me, the LIBOR scandal is not going anywhere. This is going to be used. The LIBOR scandal, folks, and the damage that has been done, and the derivatives that have been created, and all the financial criminality that has been done by the banks is the sword of Damocles that is hanging over their head. They will get dealt with. They will get dealt with. Don't think for 1 second that it's not going to happen. But now's not the time. You got to pick and choose your battles very carefully. Very carefully. And that is why Trump pardoned. Not because he's worried about the less than 1% of what he owes to Deutsche Bank. He's not losing sleep over that. There's bigger fish to fry. You've heard about that whole entire Hawaii thing. A lot of sources are saying this, and it makes a lot of sense, especially from other sources that I have that have corroborated this information. And that is the Clintons were in Hawaii, and that is confirmed. I looked that up as well. The Clintons are or were in Hawaii when that missile threat happened. Well, there's a major NSA holdout there, but throwing a DEFCON 1 signal allows a data dump. So there's a lot of things, guys, especially if you've been following that QAnon stuff. There's a lot of things that are happening. So understanding the background of all the things that are happening, and you as well as me, and I want this whole entire financial system, this criminality to end. I want the criminality and the fraud to end in the financial systems and the marketplaces. I want it to cease. I want it to stop as much as you do, as much as anyone. But there's a time for it. We have to think strategically. Think very clearly, very strategically. That's the most important takeaway here. And with that being said, this is the Gorilla, over and out.